Alright, g'day guys. So today we're going to take a look at if statements in a little bit more detail. So first of all, I've started with a button called btn if with a statement if statement and a new group box called logic. I'll now quickly create a new form for us to do this activity in. So we'll call this form frm if statements. Okay, there's our new form. So if you could quickly pause the video and add in those items, then we can go from there. Now that you've done that, double click the button and we'll open our new form, same as we've done in previous videos. So form dot frm, what do we call that form? If statements equals new frm if statements. Form if statements dot show. Okay, there we go. So we've got a nice button to test this with. All right, let's open up our new form. And the first thing we're going to need is a text box. So we can input some data we can make some choices about. Nice and long. A button, so we can execute some code, and a label, so we can output some code. Well, have something to output data to. There's our button. There's our label. Now we'll call the text box txb input. Call the button btn run. And the label lbl output. Okay, so if we double click the button, we can start looking at creating our if statements. So the first thing we're going to have to do is to make our lives simpler. We'll be running our if statements to choose between some numbers, but you can choose between anything really, any variable. But for simplicity's sake, we'll be using integers. So first of all, let's create a new integer. Int input. And then grab its value out of a text box. So int. Now, if you haven't seen this before, I suggest you go and look at the tutorial on variables, and I'll touch on how to do this in those tutorials. So txb dot text. There we go. Now that will grab the string variable out of that text box and convert it to an integer that we can actually work with. Okay, so let's put in our if statement. Let's start super simple then. All right. So first of all, we type the if in, then we open some brackets, and then we put the same type of brackets that we see inside our methods here. Okay, so inside this section, we have our conditions of the if, and here we have what happens if those conditions are met or not met, depending on how you write the if statement. Okay, so let's add some code. So if int input is equal to 1, then our label output equals that was the number 1. Not very creative, but oh well. Okay, so text. Just forgot to put the text there. Okay, so what will happen here is if the int input equals the integer 1, then label.text will grab the value of whatever we put in here. But let's add an extra bit of code that allows some stuff to happen if int input does not equal 1. So we can do that by typing else. More squiggly brackets. And now whatever happens here will be executed if int input does not equal 1. So in this case, we'll put label output dot text equals that was not 1. Okay, so let's give this a quick test and see how we're going. If statement. Yep, that seems to be exactly what we expected. Now let's put the number 5 in. Oh, yep, perfect. Okay, so that's two very, very simple uses of an if statement, but they are considerably more complex than that. So we can actually have more than one condition in an if statement. Now there's two methods we can input this. There's the symbol AND. So we can do that by putting the two AND symbols in. And in this case, whatever code is here and whatever code after it must both be true for this code to run. And we also have the two upward lines, and that is OR. So in which case, if input equals 1, or in which case, we'll put this as an example, input equals 2, if int input equals either of those two things, this code will run. Otherwise, this code will run. So let's test that. Statement, we'll put in the number 2. Oh, yep, so that's exactly what we expected. Okay. Now, of course, there is more than just equals to available to us. So we also have greater than or less than symbols. So in which case we can represent them with the greater than or less than symbols, the same as we do in math. So let's do. All right. So if 1 is less than, if input is less than 1, then we can have this happen. Or if input is less than or equal to 1, then we can have this input. Now you can see that this particular type might be extremely useful if we wanted to select in between two numbers. So we might want less than 1 or more than 1 and then less than some other number. So let's say input bigger than 1 but smaller than 4. Or smaller than equal to 4. So this is nope, I got that the wrong way around. Yep, sorry. So you do actually have to be quite picky with the way you put these. If you get them the wrong way around, it will throw an error like it just did for me. And it takes you a second to realize what happened. But yep, if you're paying attention, it's fairly obvious. So there it is directional specific. All right, so we should have here, if int input is less than or equal to 1, or int input is equal to or greater than 4. So let's change that to AND. Sorry. If input is greater than or equal to 1, and int input is less than or equal to 4, then we'll have this. Was mean the numbers 1 and 4. Just make that U. Okay. Now let's run this and see what happens. If statement 3. Oh, that makes sense. Ew. And if we do 0, ew. Okay. What if we do 1? Okay. And that's because we had used the less than or equal to sign. If you want it just to be less than, then you just remove the equal sign. Okay. So this will no longer accept 1 as an answer. So let's test that again. There we go. Okay, so there is one more thing I would like to show you about if statements. You can actually have another thing other than if and else. You can have else if. An else if is denoted by an if directly after the else. So let's throw in new conditions. I'll just copy those, paste them in, change the numbers. Okay, so 4 and let's say, I don't know, 9. That number was between 4 and 9. All right. Now we'll put our final else in. Equals that number was out of range. Okay, now let's test this one. Okay, that makes sense. Yep, that makes sense. Let's try 4. Yep, that makes sense. What about 5 though? Ooh, a new one. So it falls into this else if statement. So you can stack or chain if statements together like that to make complex decisions. You can also nest them within each other. So if you wanted to make this decision and then you had another characteristic you wanted to choose from, you can put if statements inside each other as well. Now, you don't want to do that too many times because it will get exceptionally confusing. But it is something that you can do, and that's called a nested if statement because it's nested within the other if statement. So what I'd like you to do is play around with creating a series of if and if else statements, maybe nest some if statements, try different symbols which you could help choose different numbers and see how you go. It's something that you want to play around with to make decisions, and understanding it will come with time.